Well, it is now 5 after, and we've got a full agenda, so it looks like we got most of our committees represented. We might have a few missing, but I'm gonna get us started, and um, then we'll be hearing from each committee one by one. I think everybody got the agenda for today. So we've done the welcome. The welcome consisted of nicknames and how to use AI. Very useful welcome. And thank you all for dedicating your time and effort to this big initiative. It's, it doesn't end July 15th. We're gonna talk about, what happens after that. But right now we're focusing on July 15th as sort of a big turning point in our efforts. So let's talk just for a minute about the logistics and the overview for that day. It's a Monday.
Hey,
And
Jennifer,
yep,
could I interrupt for one
yes,
second? For
yes.
those that haven't met our communications team, have
Yes,
we
thank you.
introduced them? Pat,
Nope.
all right. Yeah, y'all, Lacey, y'all want to introduce yourself so the members of the commission know who you are. And also let me introduce Dimney Rideout. Wave at them, Dimney. Dimney is a rising junior at the University of Virginia and is interning with us this summer. So, Tricia.
Sure thing. Hey folks, I'm Patricia. I am me and Lacey are on the call joining you from GMMB. We're working with the Carter Center specifically in 6 states, North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Florida. I thought I was going to forget 1 or 2, but I didn't. But we are a full service advertising firm, and we're helping out with some of the messaging and audience work around the election and working to prevent election violence with you all. And so we're going to be on this call to help provide some strategy around getting media coverage of the Election Commission and just honing the messages that you all are putting together and some of the key takeaways. So, and Lacey, if you want to give a quick introduction.
Yeah, hi guys, real quick. My name is Lacey Fay. I'm the Vice President of Digital Strategy at GMMB and have been helping the STAR project with their big picture strategy for all of their digital. So nice to meet y'all.
Great. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt, Jennifer.
No worries. Thanks, Bob. I'm glad that you reminded me that we had new folks. Okay. And we'll, as each committee presents, we'll get a sense of who all is on the commission as well, because you probably may not all know each other. So we'll do that as we go through. All right. So back to July 15th. It's a Monday, and the timing will be the same as it was at the October meeting, if you remember. And Michael, correct me if I say anything wrong, but 9:30 we'll have, coffee, and kind of people can get there and mingle for a minute, and we'll start at 10. President of Catawba, David Nelson, is going to give a short welcome. I don't know if we'll have any Carter Center folks there who also want to welcome. We'll find out before then. And then of course we'll introduce the steering committee and any other welcomes. There might be trustees there. Anybody else who needs to welcome or be recognized, we'll do that. By the way, if any of you have a long drive, either to or from Salisbury, let Michael, well, actually let Rachel know, right? Rachel's the one collecting the names for room reservations. I can be there in an hour, so I'm gonna wait and see if there are any rooms left. And I may or may not come up the night before. But if you need a room, please let Rachel know as soon as possible, because they are holding that block, and I'm sure that Salisbury gets inundated with tourists around July. So
yeah, and I just heard from the folks at the Holiday Inn. They are looking to have the reservation list next week. So if we can go ahead and get folks indicating one way or the other. We've got 25 rooms blocked for folks, and we'll send out probably another, maybe Rachel and I can work to send out another email blast to the entire commission just to get them updated and let them know they're looking for a list for next week. I'll try and see if I can push that off maybe another week or so.
Yeah, thank you. And we also appreciate the Catawba College is picking these rooms up through a generous donor. We are trying to get additional funding from a grant that the Carter Center just applied to as well, but your rooms will be paid for, so we appreciate that for sure. And the coffee, and then I guess you'll have lunch also, Michael, which was terrific last time. Thank you, thank you.
Yes, we'll plan to do that again.
Okay, great. No, much appreciated. It's such a comfortable, good facility. It's really be nice to have time to go walk in the woods right out back, but maybe at the end everybody can do that. And then the last thing on just the logistics, if you have local media contacts who are aware of your involvement and want to follow the story or whatever, let either Rachel know or Lacey and Patricia. I know that WBTV from Charlotte is interested, so I've already been in touch with them, but we do want to get some media attention. That's how some of our findings and recommendations actually, make their way into hopefully happening at some point. We want also, of course, for public education of how elections work. It's all part of that. So share any local media contacts that you know are particularly. Okay. Are there any questions on logistics before we turn to the program overview for the day?
Well, Jennifer, not a question, but I just noticed that Scott Konopastic is on the call, and folks won't know. Scott, do you want to? He was there. Oh, there he is.
Well, I'm
Introduce
here.
yourself,
I'm here.
Scott. Okay, yeah.
Sure. I think I've met most of you. Most of you may have heard my voice before. I'm Scott Konopasik. I'm an election consultant to the Carter Center, and I have 30 years of election experience in multiple states, a little bit of perspective, and I'm just tracking what you guys are doing and available as a resource if you guys need any direction.
Do you plan to come on July, Scott?
I've been considering it. I have to check with the powers that be, but and if I'm invited, I have a better chance. So
You consider yourself invited.
okay, thank you. And I'll check with the powers that be and see if I can swing that. I'll be in North Carolina in Currituck, about that same time, at the beach with my family. So I
That's
might
not
be
very
able to make a
close.
side trip.
I know you're almost to Salisbury when you're in Currituck.
Yeah.
I have no idea where Salisbury is. I know where Currituck is, though.
Yeah,
We
they're
can
not close.
ride up together.
That's right.
Yeah, actually, that that might make a long drive easier, right?
I'll let him drive.
There you go.
right,
Well,
so-
Scott, we'd love to have you because you've been helpful with your four different states of experience. You've been quite helpful in a lot of our issues, and I think he's joined most of the committee meetings at some point or other.
Right. I think I've attended all of them at least once. So.
Yeah, so we appreciate that. Super. Okay, so the overview of the program on July 15th that I sent is probably going to be tweaked because after the welcome I had us launching right into committee reports. But what I understand from our media experts is that it would actually be a good idea for any media who are there to do an overview summary of, remember those 2 or 3 big ideas we asked each committee to come up with. We're going to work with our media team and figure out, which one of those are going to be newsworthy, possibly want interviews about, etc. And we'll probably do like around 10:20, 10:30, a quick overview of, you know, here's the draft, kind of the big ideas from the draft report. Maybe that takes 15 minutes. I don't know. It depends on how many points we want to make. And then after we do the kind of overview, we'll have each committee do its presentation to explain in more detail how they researched it, how they got public input, what the findings are about how things are done now and how things might be better if they might be better. And we'll go through each committee like we'll do today. I tried to do it, my list in kind of order of thinking of, you know, first you have to have candidates get on the ballot, and then you have to tell people about it, and then you have voters getting registered, and then you have ballots and mail-in early voting. I kind of tried to do it sort of chronologically in my head. So if anybody has a better order of the committees to present, I am not, you know, completely wedded to this as the only way to do it, but I thought it made sense. So each committee would give a 10 to 15 minute summary. I mean, maybe a 10-minute summary, we have 5 minutes for questions from other folks or feedback or input. We'll figure out kind of where a good time to break for lunch will be. And we do hope that most of these the draft reports will be submitted by June 30, so that the steering committee and, you know, folks kind of finalizing the agenda will have a chance to look at that, and again, work with media outreach and figure out, you know, ways to make sure it makes a splash, that people pay attention. We of course we know this is draft. It's not going to be the final thing, but even for media to know that these are points of interest that we have research behind, that we've looked at, it's going to be, I think, very, very interesting. And also, you know, one thing about, as we go through presentations, if there are issues that are just sticking points, like, you know, we couldn't decide whether we wanted to do this or that, and we had a great discussion about it, but in the end we decided that we don't have a recommendation, that's fine. You know, I think that just shows that this is, you know, good debate and the challenges that election boards have, and trying to figure out, you know, should we have a policy, or should we let each county figure it out, or how do we tackle some of those issues? So don't feel like you have to have definite conclusions about everything. Let's see. So the draft should go in ahead of time. Oh, a question for this group. When we have lunch, I can't remember, it was about half an hour last time. Do we want to have a presentation from the state board or from, I don't know, Michael Bitzer about recent polling? I mean, do we want to have some kind of presentation at lunch? And if so, what are some ideas for doing that? I'm open to input.
For me, I really enjoyed the time to be able to network
Okay.
during that period of, you know, having to use the facilities if needed, and getting some sustenance, but also the networking was important.
That's certainly easier. Okay. That sound good to you, Michael? Yep. Yeah. Gives people, you're right, gives people more time to get their lunch and have a chance to catch up with folks. Maybe
And and you know, there may be maybe side discussions, sidebars between different groups that folks may want to have lunch together and just kind of talk about, this is how we were approaching it, how are y'all approaching it, if there's connections or ideas that span across committees.
Great. That works for me. Well, good. Well, then we've already gotten 20 minutes. We've already gotten through the program overview and logistics. Any other questions about the day of July 15th before we actually get updates from each committee?
Are we going to try and do anything the night before if folks, you know, if we have 20, 25 folks come in like we did last time, or is that?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
That probably would not be covered, that any food the night before would not be covered by the grant, but people said absolutely get together. And when we find out how many folks are coming and what time, let Rachel know what time you plan to arrive, then we can certainly arrange to meet somewhere.
Which I thought last time was really a really good opportunity to Shawnee's point about networking and getting a chance to talk with folks.
I I had a suggestion if possible. It would be really nice to be able to have for our presentations a template so that's more consistent across the board of the talking points that maybe we want to hit on. Because we do only have 10 minutes, if that. And we just want to be as succinct and consistent as possible.
Okay, so you mean like a template for your actual sharing report out? Because we have a template for the written report, but you're talking about a
Right.
template for the oral. Okay.
Yeah. Just
Yeah,
for
we-
the oral, what we can put on, just so that we're not missing anything that maybe the other committees might be addressing that maybe we could address too, so it's more consistent across the board.
Sure. Yep. The steering committee can work on that. And yeah, that's a good idea. Do people want to use slides or not? Oh, you do. Mary Jo says yes. Okay. Okay.
I just think it helps everybody flow better. You know, if people all have a PowerPoint, it keeps everybody within their time.
Okay. Well, we'll do a template PowerPoint that will help you kind of think out how you're going to present, and then it'll all be the same, basic form that we can get to Rachel ahead of time so we can show it seamlessly. And Michael, you had great tech people there. But both the times I've been up there, they're just really, really nice, great, talented people there. So thank you.
Or I'll give them a heads up. I'll try and get another refresher course on it. They are doing some major work. Of course, summer is the only time they can really get into a lot of big projects on campus. But I'll work with our IT folks and see if somebody can be on standby, easily come over to the Center for the Environment if some issues arise.
That'd be great. Yeah, tell them they're not allowed to do any digging around any of the cable or internet lines.
No guarantees, but hopefully no. Hopefully it's all in building. So
I heard today I listened to the Board of Elections meeting for a little bit today because it's about early voting, which is really interesting. But they talked about these backup kits that the elections have that has like election in a box in case everything goes down. Anybody who works elections know about these? Sounded really cool. It's kind of like what the military does with, they have solar panels and they can like set up a generator and get stuff going in the middle of a desert. Apparently our election boards have those now too.
I've heard of that happening, but I'm glad that I've never had need for that situation. But I've heard of pipes bursting, fires.
Yeah. Yep. Stuff happens. But
now there's a story.
Yeah. Myron can help us find some good stories.
That's a good. I'll also let my media partners know about July. Can't guarantee they'll be there, but I'm certain the word out.
Great. No, thank you so much. And thank you, by the way, for the op-ed you're going to publish for us too.
Yeah, Thursday online. Y'all keep your eyes peeled. Well, you probably already read it.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. And any comments will be interesting as well for that. Okay. All right. So anything else about July 15th? Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to run through the list that I sent in the order that I sent it. And the first one is ballot access and candidate filing. And who is the committee chair for that?
Me.
Kitty, okay. You want to give us your big ideas that you're going to have?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone that worked on our committee for their dedication and hard work, and a special thanks to Dr. Chris Cooper, who, if you'll look, his background does certainly not look like an office setting. It looks like he's having more fun than any of us. And also Jennifer and Rachel helped out quite a bit too. We had several Zoom meetings with a lot of discussion on different topics concerning candidate filing and qualifications, which included election by district or at large, filing fees, timing of the candidacy, election fact sheets, census and redistricting, and the unaffiliated voter. Most of our discussions centered around the unaffiliated voter fact sheets to inform the public and redistricting. In the redistricting reform, our team's first criteria was to follow the North Carolina Constitution. Our recommendation was not to use partisan data to draw lines, which included voter registration or election results. We also didn't want to use racial data to draw lines or consider the incumbent's address. What our team did want to do is to keep political communities of interest whole by avoiding splitting districts and counties and municipalities. We wanted to make the districts as compact as reasonable. We also discussed the future of elections in North Carolina depended on public perception. We wanted to create a fact sheet containing essential information about elections, redistricting, residency requirement, and other topics to distribute to committee members and to the media. We thought this would help with public opinion, and we also did a survey for candidates on their perception of the election, but I haven't gotten the results. I don't think we had too big of a response to that. Our team also looked at the fastest growing registration choice in North Carolina, the unaffiliated voter. Since January the 1st to the May 18th, for every one new Republican voter, there are over 3 new unaffiliated voters. In a little over 5 months, the Republicans have increased their numbers by 13,288, and the unaffiliated voters by 41,723, and the Democratic Party has declined by 10,333. We discussed the impact of the unaffiliated voters on the leadership of North Carolina from voting to candidacies. We discussed the difficulty of becoming an unaffiliated candidate for the general election ballot, where you would need 4% of registered signatures. And we gave samples to discuss this difficulty. One of the greatest examples was given from Burke County, where it included a distinguished veterinarian who decided he would run for school board after he had served several terms, but he decided he wanted to run as an unaffiliated candidate, and he didn't realize that he would need 2,341 signatures to do so. And we'll have all this in our draft that we do in July. We compared the difficulty in securing the signatures to anyone who would come up with a very small filing fee, and that's all they would have to do if they were registered with certain parties in North Carolina. Or we also discussed Robert Kennedy Jr., what he did to get on the ballot in November. To become an unaffiliated candidate, he would have needed 83,188 votes. So his party decided, well, his backers decided it was easier to form a new political party, and all they needed was 13,865 signatures to do that. Our team recognized that the demographics will need to be embraced because that is the fastest growing choice for voters when they register here in North Carolina. And that's all that I have. I don't know if Chris would like to add anything to it or not.
Well, you knocked it out of the park.
You kept it under 6 minutes too.
Jennifer, can I?
Yep.
One thing, just for clarity purposes, in my separate role as a lawyer, I have filed you can call it a redistricting lawsuit that is completely separate and apart from the Carter Center efforts, and some of the things that Kitty was talking about sort of play into the issues in the suit that I'm filed. So there's a possibility, in light of my role here, that some may say that I have attempted to influence the perspective of the redistricting committee, and I just want to make clear that I've stayed as far away from that as I can. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows there's a wall.
And I can attest to, we've not seen you on any of our Zoom meetings.
I'll also say that we're mostly adopting Andy Jackson from Civitas's recommendation, who has, I think, been pretty vocal against your lawsuit, Bob. So that would be an interesting coordination if you're pulling that off.
Yeah. Well, Andy doesn't have a law degree, so I'm not going to worry about his evaluation. I put this in the chat, but you got to give Chris Cooper 30 seconds to put a plug in for his book. So
I think you just did, and thank you, Bob.
The link is in the chat.
There you go.
Well, not the link. Or did Chris put the link in?
We want you to bring signed copies to July 15th.
All right.
That we'll pay for. No, that's a great point, Bob. It is separate. And I was just thinking, for our media folks, an interview with you and Andy Jackson about the merits of that would be really interesting for radio. But I don't know. Well, I don't know if we want to go there. It's pretty controversial, but interesting that we have this, have a lot of different views on the commission. I think the other great story for our media folks, the unaffiliated candidate in Burke County, it is Caroline Avery told the story. It is just a fabulous story of somebody having to climb multiple mountains, well beloved by the community. The community was behind him. They knew his service, and he had to do so much to even get on the ballot. Whereas if he were, an 18-year-old member of a political party, he could have just paid his fee and gotten on. So anyway, I think it was a great story. Storytelling is good.
I'm sorry, I've got the editorial she sent me, and I'll in July I'll submit that.
Great. Yeah, be sure to put that as a resource at the end of your report. Absolutely. Any questions for Kitty before we move on to campaign finance? Okay. Campaign finance. Bob, that was yours, right? And
Mary Jo's our chair. Yeah.
Mary Jo. Yep. Okay, Mary Jo, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thanks, everybody. We also had a great committee. And I also taught a class of undergraduates at UNC Charlotte this semester about campaign finance. And they came to the conclusion that there should be no money in elections, which is just hysterical, right? Because that's never going to happen. So I've finally convinced them that there actually was always going to be money in elections. And so we had to think of ways to look at it. So we looked at North Carolina law and our regulations, and generally realized that North Carolina really has a pretty good campaign finance system. So the committee, in looking at the whole system, came up with some suggestions in particular to help educate the public, because I think, much like my students, the public thinks any kind of money in elections is corruption. They just immediately think if there's money, there is corruption, and all politicians are corrupt. And I always ask people, well, how are you going to buy a sign if you're a candidate? How are you going to buy one of those campaign signs and put it in someone's yard if you don't have any money? So anyway, the gist of the committee is that we need to, like, a really easy way to educate the public on how campaign finance works in North Carolina. And so we came up with 3 big kind of categories of how to do that. The first one is basically, what do candidates, and this is not from a candidate perspective, but from the public's perspective, what do candidates need to know and what do they have to do to comply with the law? So basically just do an infographic and say, this is what you have to do if you're a candidate. This is the money that you can take. This is money that you cannot take. These are some of the very, very basic general regulations on campaign finance, and make it in an infographic so it's really easy for the public to digest. The second one is more about like, what are the restrictions, like where, when, the timing, what kind of reporting do you have to do? What are the regulations that candidates have to follow once they get the money? Like, what kind of reports they have to file and all that sort of stuff. So again, another infographic just saying this is where the money has to be reported, and this is where it's going to go. And just, again, all about educating the public on a very basic level. Now, anybody that knows campaign finance, it's extremely complicated. So we've kind of boiled it down to a very basic level to make these infographics as readable and usable as possible. Part of that also is how all the contributions are monitored and audited. Like who does the auditing, and where's that information go? Do we ever publish the audits? So we'll also have a little bit about the auditing process and who does the audits, what goes into an audit. There's 4 different tiers of audits, and the 4th one is like the worst one. Like, how many people get audited on the 4th level? It sounds like the 4th level of, hell or something like that to get to that audit level. So, how many candidates actually get there? And it's very, very few. And so I think the public needs to know that, because one of the big things that the committee was aiming at was public education, that there really is not as much corruption as you think. Just because there's money in there does not necessarily mean corruption. And you have to consider the fact that your opponent's watching, the state is watching, the press is watching, everybody's watching every single thing you do as a candidate. And the more the public realizes that there's always somebody watching, then they're going to have more confidence in elections, and they're more confidence in that our campaign system is legitimate and is not ripe with corruption. So we want to make sure that happens. The final point here is that the auditing process, to get that done and to do it well, we realize that the state doesn't have the resources to do that. And this is our main recommendation, is that the state needs to put more resources, including money and people, into the campaign monitoring system. And I think that by putting some more money into it and publicizing that investment into campaign monitoring, it could really increase the legitimacy of elections in North Carolina. As we tell people, hey, look, we're going to have this really robust monitoring system, and these are the audits, and this is where you can go find an audit, and you can look up your candidate here. As you can find this information and it's readily available, then more people should have more confidence in elections. So our whole committee is really geared around this public education around campaign finance, because as I said at the beginning, we really do have a pretty good campaign finance system in North Carolina. We just need more money for the monitoring piece and to publicize it. So, questions?
So Mary Jo, where did you all end up on mentioning public finance? Like states that do that, or how we use...
It didn't really come up in our committee, frankly. No one brought it up. My class did quite a bit, but public finance is funky because of the Supreme Court rulings. But there is this one case in Seattle where they have democracy vouchers. And it's kind of a new way of doing public financing. But it wasn't recommended by the committee. No one really, wasn't really taken up, so.
I would just add that the whole campaign finance sphere is so complex,
Mhm.
both the federal and state level, that, I mean, you could have an entire commission for a year working on nothing but the nuances of campaign finance. Justice Edmonds is probably the only person here who's actually participated in a public financing system back when judges were getting some public financing, but it was just, you know, there was so much we tried to narrow the scope into the educational piece and then to the financing piece.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I think a lot of candidates on the local level are not aware that their campaign finance is public record. They
Right.
think that they turn it in and that's where it stays. When I was the director of elections, I would always put it on my website, their campaign finance. And I know when I ran for county commissioner, what boosts me in my campaign was when the candidate running against me was taking money and buying clothes with it. And he had no earthly idea that that was going to show up. And his reasoning was that, you know, he was using it to campaign I think he bought 5 new suits of clothes. I don't know if anybody's been to the state's website, but the campaign finance, they do a great job. They have all the instructions. They tell you exactly where to put everything. And I know it's different on the county level versus state and federal, but the state does a good job of helping tell you exactly what needs to be done.
And they do. I mean, that's the thing that when we looked into how the state does campaign finance, I mean, their whole goal is to help candidates not break the law, right? And it's about education. And so maybe as we're educating the public, maybe some candidates will actually learn that information is public record as well.
Yeah, I would note Lindsay Wakely, who is head of the campaign finance section, said that they have requested a $5 million appropriation for new technology in the short session. They have no idea whether they'll get any or all of it. But I asked, could you tell us how much in the aggregate, roughly, how much money is flowing through the campaign system in North Carolina? And she's said, no, there's no way our technology's 20 years behind. So, they do a great job with the resources they have, but I think without question, bringing them into the 21st century would be a plus.
Well, then
Absolutely.
you have PAC money also, and you've got so many different PACs that, you know, are sending money to North Carolina. That will be hard.
Can
Yeah,
I ask a question? If that is the case, should we not, and maybe we should be watching for, I guess, what's going to happen and make sure that we say update the technology or something? Is that something that we should be doing?
Yeah, I think
Maybe that's something the committee has discussed, Mary Jo, at all.
Well, we had discussed it, yeah, at our most recent meeting about some of the money needs to go to update the campaign finance system because it's antiquated.
Mm-hmm.
So Jennifer, I don't have a question, but I have an observation. So I'm not the chair of the Civic Education Committee, but I'm on it. And the recommendation, which Lucy will get into, is more about the structure for educating the public. And so after hearing that report, it feels like their recommendation is to educate the public on this specific area of elections. And so I just want us to hold on to the possibility that several of the recommendations from committees may have a civic education component embedded. And so I think we need to also sort of track those so that when we approve maybe or give our recommendation for the structure, then we can think about what are the messages we're trying to communicate.
Yeah,
It
I was having the same thought because our next committee is going to be the Civic Education Committee. And I think every committee is going to have a public education aspect. But that's a really good point to track, the biggest myths or the biggest beefs that the public has with, campaigns and election in general, and figure out ways to counter that. Because you're right, if people think that campaign finance is all corrupt, that reduces faith and confidence in every democratic institution. And I mean, I remember having to file those reports. They are lengthy and detailed and no fun when you have to fill them all out. That's why you have a treasurer. But no, it's a really, really good point. Keep track of all the things, the different issues. So the next one is civic education. And Jim, you're not the chair, but I'm trying to think who else is on.
I'm on, Jennifer.
Oh, there you are. Hey, look
Here.
Okay.
I've been off camera, but I'm on now. It's great to be with y'all, and I'm excited to share a few updates with each of you. I am co-chair along with Damon Sarcosta, who is not able to be here this afternoon, but I hope to make him proud with this short presentation. And I love seeing some of our fellow committee members, Jim and Leslie, on here, who have done a lot of the heavy lifting for the committee, along with being chairs of another one. So I want to give y'all a big shout out. And thank you, Jennifer and Martha, for being such great supports and thought partners in it. The question that really guided us as a committee was, how are voters getting information about elections? And that's a big, big topic. So what we sort of narrowed it down to is there are two main messengers. There are trusted organizations, and then the state and local county boards of elections. So Leslie has been invaluable in spearheading the asset mapping of North Carolina organizations that work on civic education and who are community, leaders, and making sure citizens know about elections and all of the details that comprise them. And we compiled over 15 organizations that are doing civic education work. There are also member organizations on college campuses across North Carolina with the Campus Engagement Pack, and that's over 40 contacts that Leslie has assembled. So we have all of the assets mapped to get a lay of the land, right, and understand who is doing the work. The second big piece were, the Board of Elections, and we reached out to the public information director at the state Board of Elections, and he gave us an update on what they're doing about voter ID. They're only sending 2 mailers. I don't know if anybody got one in February. I got one to my mailbox that, outlines the new changes to voter ID. And then they're planning to send another one in early October. They've also hired an outreach specialist. So we've, tried to synthesize the information that we know is coming from the state board. And then one of our committee members, Catherine Comp, spearheaded a survey to local directors of county boards of elections. And so we sent that out in the last couple months, and we had an almost 25% response rate. So 23 directors responded, which I think is pretty impressive. And it stretches all the way from Jackson County in the west to Currituck County in the east. And it's a really great, I think, cross-section of the state. And we had some interesting findings. We asked them, how are you doing civic education work? And over half of them don't have a staff person whose job description includes voter education. They shared a list of, recommendations for what they would need to adequately reach the public with information on voting in elections. They had great, ideas about what they need, like uniform materials specific to North Carolina that all counties can utilize, that are standard and that, makes so that they don't have to spend as much time coming up with things from scratch. We got some good qualitative stories from them. Several said they need better local media because they don't get enough coverage that's, tailored to their area. And several of them said they look forward to hearing our results from other county directors to help them. So we're meeting later this week as a committee to formulate our recommendations for best practices. And, as Leslie and Jennifer, as y'all just mentioned, like we hope to be a partner in the Trusted Elections Tour as an extension of our civic education work. And we may or may not have an idea to involve the Panthers in some of our programming for this fall. So hopefully we can pull something like that off. But that's the bulk of it. Sorry that I rambled. And we are open to any and all feedback.
Yeah, that's great overview. So you are meeting later this week to have kind of your big idea recommendation things finalized.
Yes, we meet on Thursday.
Great. Any questions or input for Lucy and her group?
I would just mention something, Lucy. You're talking about getting the Panthers involved. And we talked about this at a Carter Center deal, and we just hadn't followed up. But the NIL, the name, image, likeness groups that use college athletes, use it as a vehicle to provide compensation to college athletes. There's some that are dedicated to nonprofit efforts. I think it's geared more to athletes going to, children's hospitals or camps for kids, that kind of stuff. But, we might find, an NC State football player and a Carolina football player that would do a promo saying that, well, we don't agree on football or politics, but we agree on the process. So anyway, I throw that out there for your group to consider.
I would love to piggyback on that and see something by some of these athletes to get poll workers to come in and work on election day.
Oh, wow. Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be very helpful.
And I got to warn you, Cher is a big Duke supporter. So,
well, my husband went to 3 of the ACC schools. He's trying to get an ACC degree.
So Cher, you're talking about having the athlete just show up at the poll and thank all the workers kind of thing?
Oh, no, I'm saying maybe a public
public announcement. Gotcha.
Public announcement on TV where, let's say a player from each member of the ACC comes together during the election season and says, maybe sometime this summer says, hey, and don't just go vote, go work.
I love it.
Where we're really missing people is in that younger crowd.
Yep.
We'll talk about our committee in a minute, but I think that's, I'm glad you came up with that, Shara. That's probably something we can add to election administration and infrastructure.
I
So
forgot to add
write that down. I wrote it down, but
and
let's write it down.
add Taylor Swift and someone else maybe going with her doing it, because I think we could get a lot of people working.
I don't know if we can afford Taylor Swift.
She might do it for free.
Exactly. No, this absolutely influencers of all kinds be great to have. Sure. Anybody have contacts? Let us know. Any other questions for Lucy and the committee or suggestions? Okay, it's a big task. It covers all the committees really. Let's move along then to voter access and registration. Is that you, Myron?
That's me. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to co-sign what everybody said about getting athletes and names involved. You talk about getting the media and the press out there, they're going to cover that every time. Of course, J. Cole is from Fayetteville, so maybe we can somehow. People ask me if I know him. I'm like, I know him, but not like that. So, forgive the road noise. I had a tire go out. I just got it replaced. In fact, I'll have to leave and return after this, after I settle up with the shop. But yeah, we had voter access and registration, and as has been touched on, a lot of it is going to involve voter education. I think we found and Martha she can add and correct me if I'm wrong. But I think we found that we get a lot of it right, but there's some tweaks we could do, and there's certainly a piece for education where we can help, traditional groups that can easily have access problems, help them be able to cast their ballot. Because if I think our overarching goal was sort of look at to what are the challenges to certain groups, whether it's seniors, folks who are disabled, people who are former felons, students, anyone who, large pockets of voters that might, and of course, language, of course, people who English is their second or third language, people who may have those kinds of access problems. So I divided it up, and, we will have, for our final report, we'll have, some more specific examples, and there's a lot of great research that went into it, but I kept it simple for this meeting. The things we want to improve is improve voter education is one recommendation. Improve accessibility for disabled voters. Expand language translation services. Facilitate felon voting rights and access. And facilitate college student voting. So taking those briefly in order, we foresee working with the Civic Education Committee on some of these voter education campaigns. We do feel like misinformation must be addressed. So I would not advise using that word misinformation in our materials because it just kind of turns a lot of people off. But think about what myths are out there. And we should provide information on the voter rights and procedures, any legislative changes. And as we know in North Carolina, those can come at us pretty fast and hard. And then include outreach to some of the groups, the aforementioned groups that I mentioned. Second part, improve accessibility for disabled voters. This is very much like the first part. Using the insight and research that we have to ensure that voting materials and polling places are fully accessible. I am a big fan personally, and I think our committee is too, of kind of having a standardized sort of approach. So no matter what precinct you walk in North Carolina, if you're a disabled voter, this is what you will see. Because certain groups like disabled voters, and they're going to be at every precinct. So we favor a standardized approach to these materials that we roll out, and it should be information. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Information relevant to these voting access for disabled voters, and it should be put in a very prominent place at voting sites. And I'm sure some sites have this. Speaking for sites in Cumberland County, I don't see it as much, though we do many things right here in Cumberland County. Expand language translation services for non-English speakers. Right now, I believe our committee found that the only foreign language ballot you could get is in Spanish, but we can look at translating voting materials, ballots, and boosting resources. So there are other options for non-English speakers who don't speak Spanish, which is many people. And that's only going in one direction. There will be more and more North Carolinians who fit this bill. we want to focus on languages prevalent among our specific demographics. And we looked at one of the most interesting slides we looked at was kind of heat maps, and it kind of shows where different languages are spoken more often by the speakers there. And there were some surprises in there. So that's kind of a way, if we're looking to, and I guess we're always looking to be the most efficient with our funds, whatever funds we can scrounge up, that can help us target where we want to expand these services. In terms of felon voting rights and access, this one is, it's an issue that near and dear to me because I reported much on reentry. People coming out of prison, as most people are, you know, the vast majority of people who go into prison are going to come out of prison at some point, transitioning them to a normal lifestyle. It's win-win for everybody. It decreases recidivism, and I don't have to go through the whole song and dance. But if you're familiar with reentry, what the folks reentering get is usually a lot of information coming at them at one time. And somewhere in that is how to restore their voting rights. So we want to coordinate with individuals and nonprofits that work with reentry programs. Of course, materials should include voting guides, absentee ballots, and any kind of support they need. That's why I was very happy to hear about the numerous organizations statewide that are doing civic education. So we see ourselves as coordinating not only with them, but people whose specific, in terms of former felons, specific interest area is reentry. There's usually plenty of those organizations, nonprofits you can find. And then lastly, but certainly not least, college student voting. We want to boost education efforts on campus, working with individual students, student-led organizations, and relevant college personnel. You know, to again about that education, voting access, where they can vote, days of early voting, posted around campus where it needs to go. And then for down the road is something we try to pull together. Martha can speak a little bit more to it. Surveys and focus groups to identify what specific barriers that college students have that we may not be aware of. Because I've been out of college a long time as a student, and I was never a professor. So I don't know all that goes on and all the challenges students may have when it comes to voting. So that's what I have, and I welcome any questions.
So one
Great.
thing that we didn't get a chance to really debate about at all was the committee, because we end up talking so much about everything that's going on. Well, there's a couple of things, but so we didn't make a specific recommendation yet, maybe, about whether or not North Carolina should roll back its got the with felon voting, if it makes you serve your entire sentence, like including any payments or whatever, before you're allowed to vote again. This is a fairly recent court decision. And so we as a committee really hadn't talked about that or how to address it. And so I think we can address that maybe our next meeting, or at least talk about it. Because I talk so much about college students and about the other thing that we didn't get a chance to get to really talk about what you had. And that's great. So I don't know if we want to make any suggestions on that or not. And then the other thing is, like, we don't have a list anywhere of who can't, like a list of the felons or people who have or haven't finished their sentences and at what point. And I think it's really confusing for people. And so that may be something that we want to try and advocate, is creating a list of, okay, there's got to be someone that can keep track of who is eligible to vote and who's not. And then one other thing that I had suggested in the past, and we're very passionate group about our access, but I suggested that we also take a look at, we didn't get to the registration side as much, but at a minimum, I felt like we should be talking about the electronic registration. Holy cow. I always forget it when the guys want to help
Is
me
it
with
Eric?
that. Eric. It's basically an organization that was put together in the early, not too long after the 2000 election, the early somewhere in the 2000s, that joined states together in a compact to check for double voting. And North Carolina had intended to join it, except for last year, there was some misinformation, or rather maybe more disinformation sort of spread around about Eric, saying that they were nothing more than trying to register a bunch of people who were Democrats. And the reason they said that is because part of what the member group states and Eric had pushed forward is that every Secretary of State or chief election official should be contacting people who are eligible to vote, but that hadn't yet registered. And so Eric, North Carolina and several southern states just ran for the hills. Yep, thank you. That's the website. Thank you, Michael. And so I threw that out at once, but I'll tell you, we really are. We had detailed research about disabled voting. We had detailed research from Nadine put together all these maps about languages and voting, and the felon voting stuff is great, but we haven't talked about it. We were going to put together a college student survey, but I couldn't get my IRB to agree to it before school ended. So, which is an institutional review board, human subjects protection, and long story, but we didn't get to that. But maybe, the student committee can talk about whether that's something we should try and revisit in August, maybe before we do
Right.
I don't know if it's worth it or not, but.
Yeah, and there's certainly there's nothing to stop us from making Eric one of our recommendations. To something like Martha said, we haven't talked about that, but once we have our final discussion before July, that may wind up being one of our recommendations. And the other thing, and on the felon voting, again, even if that doesn't rise to the level of recommendation, there's still some discussions we have to have. Certainly the great research that Martha referenced, we can pull out the relevant facts about felon voting, the advantage, the making it easier for former felons to vote, and the advantages of that. And certainly that could be included in our
Yeah, like you referenced, some of the research about how it helps people reestablish themselves in the community
Right.
better. It's good for, there's such good research on that. So
No, those sound like great topics. And if you guys need to meet one more time, you could even do it by email and decide what your big ideas are, what your recommendations are. That's fine. Nobody else has been talking about felons, Eric, or not as much about language. Other committees have been talking about disabled access to early voting, curbside, day of elections, that kind of thing. So if you want to focus more on felons,
well, that research is kind of done and very detailed, Jennifer. So maybe it's worth when Ted did
crossover.
that. And it looks like there's going to be some crossover on that.
Yeah, and that's fine. And that's one of the conversations that can happen that day, the day of July 15th.
But those were our big ideas: disabled voting, college students, felons, and language access. And that's what we spent quite a bit of time researching.
Who holds the information that a felon has met all the requirements to have their voting rights restored, and then it's just a process of, I guess, formally getting them restored?
There's not a singular database that I know.
That's
I
the
mean, if
thing.
you've heard of it, Shara, and Shara actually attended one of our meetings to talk about some of the access sort of issues she had, as a poll worker, she had seen. But my understanding is there is not a central database that would help anyone do that.
I know Wake County,
least of all the felons.
Wake County Bar Association gets together a bunch of attorneys, and we go through a number of files to get someone's vehicle rights restored. And this sounds like maybe a similar project if we knew if this was a county by county situation or, you know, someone at the state level, so that we could go about getting this done just like we do driver's license.
Right.
Wow. That's a lot of info, a lot of great suggestions. So I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
that,
thanks, Sharon.
yeah, I'm sure our
Thanks,
media
everybody. Yeah.
got lots of good stories there.
So,
Okay. We are gonna have to keep moving because we got 7 more committees, and if we can try to keep it to like 5 minutes, that would be awesome. And if you have any other questions about access, you'll have to do email. I'm just putting my foot down. Okay. Ballot security and cybersecurity. James.
Hey, thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everybody. James out of Wake County. My co-chair, Dr. Stephen Tate, unable to be with us tonight. But Mary Jo was one of the members of our committee, so good to see a friendly face there. So I'm going to quickly go through. We identified our top 3 issues, and I'm going to break from the norm here a little bit because everybody's seen my face enough. And I'm going to share a slide. And if I can just get a thumbs up, can people see that okay? And so these are our top 3 issues. Really, we had the pleasure of having probably the most technical topic out of the different committees, and that ours was cybersecurity. So very digitally intrinsic, very hard for a lot of people to understand. And that was really at the crux of most of our issue discussion, was about that most voters do not understand how we secure our elections, mainly from a digital standpoint. There's lots of misinformation out there about hacking and who can get in and stealing elections, and it's kind of run rampant the last couple of election cycles. And so people are just scared about how this works in the real world. And so our biggest number 1 issue up front was understanding how North Carolina secures its elections digitally in depth, which is really how we do it. There isn't one solution. It's not one piece of technology. It's through a layered approach of people, processes, and different technologies. On the people side, we train people very well to understand how elections work, the tech they're using. Process-wise, we have lots of built-in redundancies, checks and balances, so there isn't a single fault or a single vulnerability that will bring an election down. And then on the tech side, everything we do digitally goes through a validation process, from the laptops that we buy where we access our voter rolls to the actual tabulators that collect the ballots. Everything goes through validation and testing to make sure they're the right systems, they pass the test. We don't have chips in there from China that are compromised. They go through all these different tests to make sure the equipment, all the way down to the firewalls that guard our websites. But the problem is most voters don't understand or see any of this. So they are scared about how our processes and technologies are secured. And so while this is one of our biggest challenges, the way we combat this, kind of our 2 recommendations, like most other people, we have a big theme throughout all of our concerns that involves education and informing voters on just letting them know how we secure things. That doesn't mean showing them how a circuit board works, but it shows them that we have layered processes that just kind of restore some confidence that we do go through a lot of different things to ensure that voting is safe and secure in North Carolina. And then another one, this is one of the areas where prioritization of funding is pretty key. One thing you don't want to skip if you don't have to when it comes to prioritizing budget resources for elections is on securing our technology. And so every year, this is going to be a push to, hey, we need to make sure we have the most up-to-date equipment, everything's patched, that we have the right number of people that can maintain all of our polling sites and all the equipment each polling site. So budget prioritization is a key takeaway, as well as informing the public. Concern number 2, confidence in ballot chain of custody. A lot of voters, again, don't understand once they choose who they're voting for and they put that ballot into the tabulator, what happens next. It just goes into a big box. If they're listening closely, they can hear a clunk, but then they don't really know. There's not that satisfying. They don't get a receipt. They get a cool little sticker, but they don't get a validating receipt saying, I voted on this day. I know that my vote's been counted. And I'm not saying we develop a process and we do not have a recommendation to do that. But there's some education and informing we can do to the public and messaging on how, sort of the life of a ballot. We had a long discussion one day about, the old schoolhouse rock of the life of a bill, how a bill becomes a law and how that was ingrained in our childhood. And so the life of a ballot, most people don't understand what happens after they, mark that ballot. It goes in the tabulator. What happens? How do you secure it? How does it get consolidated at the county level? How does it get counted? And so there's an inform and influence campaign that I think we can do at the county level to let voters know what happens to their ballot once they vote, so they know it's secured through the entire process. And then lastly, voter list maintenance, which I know touches a little bit on registration, but ours is really about securing voter lists themselves as they get updated. But transparency in the voter list maintenance process is a big concern. And having voters, they know that, people die, people move, they change states, they change precincts. So voter rolls need to be updated and maintained at the city and county level. But how that happens is a mystery to many people. And so many voters, number one, don't understand who has the authority to change voter lists and update them. And then when changes do happen, what is a voter's recompense if they think a mistake has been made? What is their vote? How do they vote in that process if they believe a mistake is made? If they believe someone is using their address illegally that doesn't live there, or if they've been taken off a roll, how do they reestablish themselves or put in a complaint process to make sure that their voice has been heard, having that voter in the loop, that feedback process in case they believe something's happened in the maintenance process that doesn't make sense. So those are sort of the big three from us. The big theme, of course, is education, informing, messaging. We've done a couple of town halls. One thing that we got out of, we did one in Forsyth County, and they do mainly geared towards election and poll workers. They do something what they call their election academy, where they go through and they teach people how elections work, how they secure things. Again, I'm not sure you can open this up to everybody in the public, but again, outreach programs where we can teach people how elections work in North Carolina, I think will go a long way. And so I think we could also put on our websites at the local county level, boards of election, how-to videos, how things work. Again, just informing the public. And so I'll stop there. I've kind of hit my time limit, but I'll pause there, see if there are any question, comments about what we found in our group.
James, great overview. And I was joining that committee, and that's a great synthesis of what we went over. And absolutely, I think we should raise up the whole idea of the Forsyth County civic engagement. Tim Suey had a great explanation of that at our town hall. Citizen Academy sounds wonderful. Any questions for James? He just covered it. Boom. All right. We did find in our town hall tour in 2022 that people needed a lot of comfort around machines. So public education. Okay. Our next topic is, and by the way, in case you hadn't noticed, this is kind of a dry run for July 15th. See, you guys will be all ready for it. You'll have about twice as much time. That's about it. So this is good. Mail-in ballots.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. I wanted to first thank Dr. Michael Bitzer. He was my co-chair, and he provided a lot of data that we had utilized, and just was a great support. We had a vibrant committee, a lot of robust discussions regarding mail-in voting. As you can imagine, it's probably one of the most contested areas of the voting process that we have today. So really, our conversations mirrored the conversations that are happening on the community level. There was ran the gamut of focusing on the trust of the mail-in ballots, drop boxes, that balance between accessibility and security for mail-in ballot. I will go over. Let me just open up my little notes here. So the key areas of focus included the current laws and rules governing mail-in ballot voting, as well as the specific procedures for absentee or mail-in voting. The committee delved into the importance of public awareness and education, recognizing that being well-informed is essential for the effective participation in the voting process. Perceptions and attitudes towards mail-in voting were also examined in depth, with particular attention to how these views are shaped by ongoing public discourse. Nadine Gibson provided us a really neat data set from, I believe it's the University of Utah, that talked about the feelings. It rated a feelings thermometer in between Democrats and Republicans and independents towards different voting methods. And it was interesting in the sense that Democrats tended to lean into any type of voting method. It didn't matter. They were in the 70 to 80th percentile for favorable views of anything, really, where you can see a drop off just slightly with the Republican side in the lack of trust as they get further away from the ballot box of actually putting a ballot with their hands in the box. So the further it got away from it, the less favorable views. But it really wasn't as bad as what we thought. You know, it was way above the 50th percentile in trust of the process. So that was a surprising factor. Accessibility emerged as a significant topic, highlighting the need to ensure that all eligible voters, including those with disabilities, those that lived in rural areas, those that had language barriers, those that were, residents within nursing homes and care centers, would be able to fully participate in the voting process. Some of that discussion moved on over to the reliability of the United States Postal Service. Some people shared their experiences with torn up ballots that arrived late, ballots that were not stamped, things like that, those things that can create problems in the process while somebody is trusting the mail, the Postal Service. So there was some suggestions that came out of that and some discussion around that. Also regarding utilizing mail-in voting, the necessity of providing financial assistance that could take down some barriers, such as ensuring that all mail-in voting envelopes had prepaid postage available. So that was something that everybody was pretty much on board with. Security considerations were paramount, addressing concerns about potential fraud, tampering, and the overall integrity of the mail-in ballots. And that tension that mostly came regarding our discussions around drop boxes. There was issues on chain of custody. Some people felt like, it was a necessity and for accessibility, and other people felt very strongly that chain of custody, outranks that. So it was a robust discussion. The discussions explored the intersection of these issues with the broader context of current events and public discourse, understanding that the political and social climate are a profound influence in voter confidence and participation. Another interesting data set Dr. Bitzer gave us in mail-in voting behavior. Really, he brought in all the data back from 2006 up till 2022 that showed the differences within mail-in balloting. There was different methods of voting, but we focused on mail-in voting. And just picking out the years of the presidential elections, 2012, 2016, 2020, we looked at the differences in mail-in voting behavior between Republicans and Democrats. And what was interesting that is in 2012, Republicans, and in 2016, by the way, Republicans utilized mail-in voting more than Democrats. And that was a shocker because, you have these preconceived ideas about attitudes towards mail-in voting, when in actuality, Republicans utilize the mail-in voting process more, so considerably more than Democrats. In 2020, it was the opposite. Democrats was at 44% versus 21% that they participated in mail-in voting. So that was interesting. The other important pieces was trust and transparency especially with the Board of Elections. Public trust in fair elections they felt hinges on the transparency of the decision-making processes on mail-in voting and the responsiveness to the citizens and stakeholder concerns and impartial enforcement of election laws. And some voters believe that mail-in voting lacks security compared to in-person voting due to concerns about tampering and things like that. Ballot verification concerns came up. Voters and officials may have concerns about verifying ballots accurately and efficiently to prevent the fraud. Exploitation and manipulation risks were discussed, and some insights. We talked about ensuring voter accessibility for mail-in voting was very important. The importance of transparency in the mail-in voting process, especially through the State Board of Elections, and how to do that. They felt very strongly that we need to improve the way that we educate our communities on mail-in voting. This was a very, very big conversation that we felt that there just wasn't enough. If you looked at just a data as it relates to race, which we looked at with that mail-in voting, even in race between white, non-Hispanics and Blacks, it is the Grand Canyon of divide in mail-in voting. Down to 9%, possibly lower for Blacks utilizing mail-in voting based upon in the 70 percentile with whites, Hispanics, things like that. So whites, Hispanics were 1%. So the idea is that we really need to improve what they understand about mail-in voting, how they can access their ballots, the process, and to ensure that when they do mail-in voting, that it is taken care of, that there is strong security measures for them. We feel like the media awareness, the public awareness of that would greatly increase public trust in elections. And lastly, let's see. That's about it. It was excellent. We talked about our value assumptions, and where we came from as far as and how we felt our experiences working at the polls. We even reached out to an election official out of Oregon to talk about their experiences with drop boxes, things like that. But ultimately, North Carolina, I would say, and I'm careful in this, that overall the committee felt very strongly that North Carolina truly is a leader in the mail-in voting security, mail-in voting access, that yes, there can be some improvement here, but really how it's running now is really solid. We have a lot to be proud of in North Carolina.
That's
So I'll leave
great.
it at that.
That's great. We need to move on to the next one, early voting, but Martha, you got a quick question?
Oh, I was gonna throw in something controversial. Is it worth mentioning the 2018 stuff?
What, ballot harvesting?
The ballot harvesting, yeah. It happens, something happened.
And it got caught.
And it got caught?
Yes. And it got caught.
Yeah.
And it was dealt
So
with.
I guess I'm just asking, is that something we mentioned in the report, or is that, it was there? I guess what I'm asking is it something we acknowledge? It was there. It happened.
Well, that's up to the committee. If the committee wants to mention that it is a challenge and we have systems in place that catch it, then the committee can put that in the report. It's really up to.
I would say we did discuss that.
Yeah.
Okay. But it wasn't we didn't, belabor the point. The point is that it was caught, it was dealt with, people got into trouble. And it was just a testament that the system works in North Carolina. There's always going to be people that are going to, they're going to break the law. They're going to take advantage.
Yep.
And one of the conversations that came out of that was, again, back to the fairness of enforcement. So when questions do come up, valid questions and concerns from the Board of Elections on county levels or from participant voters, how is that enforcement, equitable, and is it being addressed like it should? So but we didn't really focus on that too much.
Mary Jo?
Yeah, I was just going to say about that specific incident, yes, it was caught. It wasn't like a huge incident, where like thousands and thousands of ballots were harvested. So I just think if you're going to mention it, weigh the costs and benefits of doing so, and whether or not it's going to really benefit the public to rehash it, or whether we want to build confidence in elections.
Well, that's right. And that's why I didn't include it in my report.
Very good.
I just didn't feel, it was probably the most talked about is public trust. Yeah. And in all of our deliberations, in all of the data, it comes to be that North Carolina leads in this. We have so much to be proud of. And do people take advantage? Yes, they do. And they will continue. So it didn't come up in our report at all.
Great. Well, we've got time to look at drafts and hone them still. So great points. Early voting, Jim Morrill. You got 5 minutes.
Okay, Mayor Alexander co-chaired this committee, but it's raining here.
Big thunderstorms going on. Yep.
So we looked at the use of early voting, the time allowed for early voting in North Carolina, and the convenience of sites in various counties for voters. First, we should say that since it started in 1999, early voting has gotten more and more popular. Dr. Bitzer found that over 62% of people who voted in 2020 voted early. Another thing, North Carolina has 17 days of early voting. The national average, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures, I think is 26 days. Leslie did a deep dive into this, and if she wants to talk about it in a minute, she can. We looked at the convenience of sites. Every county is in charge of selecting sites for early voting. Big counties like Mecklenburg County, Wake County have a lot of sites, but there's no real pattern or formula for selecting sites. And there are some smaller counties have more sites than some medium-sized counties, which can be a problem. So I think we talked about the need for guidelines of some sort about where people should put their sites. And the more people obviously people like early voting, and so the easier it is for them, the better. And I just had a chance today to look at the public comments that came in to the State Board of Elections about early voting. There were some challenges to some local boards' decisions about early voting, and that just, I think it was just published on Friday. So I just glanced at some of the comments, and the ones I looked at were almost all in support of early voting. And, there was even support for more Sunday voting, which again is up to the individual counties. I guess some counties have more of that than others. So Mayor Alexander, Leslie, am I leaving anything out?
No, I think this was, one that we could really focus on just a few aspects of it. And I think it's sort of like what Shawnee was saying. I think we have a good system. We fall in the middle. We're not the longest number or the shortest number. We do find Sunday voting is popular. And you're right, Jim, all the comments I read said, at least one day of Sunday. A lot of them were like, we want both Sundays. But anyway, no, I think that's one of our big ideas. It's popular. We're right in the sweet spot, and Sunday voting should stay there. There was also some talk about access, to make it geographically accessible. And students, there were some sites that were moved away from colleges and universities, and there was some pushback on that. And so there's some issues we raised about the siting of early voting too.
Yeah, one example was in Henderson County where I think had only one early voting site, and that was in Hendersonville. And a lot of the population in Henderson County is in the northern part of the county near Asheville. So those people had to drive all the way to Hendersonville. Anything else? Okay.
Wake County provides some interesting information about the differences between early voting and day of voting. And one of the things that's interesting about early voting is you can go and you can register to vote and vote at that point, early voting. And I would love for that message to get out to the general public, because they come in day of and that's not available to them.
Yeah,
that's a really good
registration is big.
Yeah, we should add that to our comments, Jim, for sure. Yep. Good point. Thanks, Sheriff. Moving right along before the thunderstorm knocks out our electricity. Primaries and election day process. Who we got for primaries?
That's me and Shara. I'll
Okay,
kick us off. So we have a pretty sweeping topic, and we tried to look at it very broadly. Election day processes and primary processes. So our sort of areas of focus were what we called the ballot journey, but specifically kind of like, how is the ballot marked? Is it marked by hand? Is it marked by machine? How's it counted? Those kind of things. Also, oh yeah, and I forgot, I wanted to kick off with disaster planning. That's something you kind of do before, but affects the day. So disaster planning was another topic. Casting ballots and voter assistance. And really this topic focused on folks who who have accessibility issues and need assistance or accommodations during the voting day. Secrecy and privacy at the polling site. Poll observers, their roles and requirements. Vote counting and certification and closing of the polls in the tabulator. Runoff thresholds. This is a really interesting topic. Runoff thresholds and ranked choice voting. We decided to tackle those two interesting topics. And then we just recently met yesterday, actually, and added a quick topic, how semi-closed primaries work in North Carolina. So we've added that to our list. So these are all kind of hot off the press. Like I said, we just met yesterday. But some of the things we thought that might be of interest in terms of big ideas. One is the concern about, I believe it's a new law that requires something like a registry requiring people who are assisting a voter to register at the polling place. And so there's concerns about this new legislation and the potential chilling effect it may have on people with disabilities and their assistants during the process, having to disclose this information that you were there, and how's that going to be used. Another thing that we talked about that we sort of came down is that North Carolina should consider and really relook at the benefits and the costs of runoff thresholds. Do we need a runoff threshold? We just had a runoff in the state, so it's front of mind right now, a very expensive process. And is the sort of the I don't know, in Spanish they say vale la pena. Is the value worth the cost and the pain of doing a runoff? So that was another thing we wanted to add. And then finally, I don't know if this is the right wording, but I would say that North Carolina has a very strong ballot integrity process, and by this I mean sort of how the votes are recorded. And so making the public aware of some things we think that would be reassuring. For example, North Carolina uses paper ballots. So whether you mark it in a machine or, on a paper ballot, there is a paper ballot for everyone. Also, although every polling place or every county can choose the types of machines they use and tabulators and such, there's a very strict process about how those are certified. And in fact, we only have 3 vendors in North Carolina that have gone through that rigorous process. And all the systems in North Carolina have been tested and used and audited in other states. So there's a lot of track record there. I'm going to hand it over to Shara, because she did a number of the topics and has some more potential things to add. So Shara?
Well, based on what I've heard here today, I'm thinking that we may need to add a section or talk about this ballot integrity on when you're getting prepared in Wake County for election day. There's a chain of custody on these ballots, and I think we need to talk more about that. As a chief judge, I'm the one that has to go pick up these ballots, and we get a sheet and it's signed by several people, and they know exactly how many ballots I've gotten in a primary. They'll know if it's a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green. They will assign me a certain number of ballots, and at the end of the night on election day, I have a reconciliation form, and that number of ballots that I was issued will go on that form, and then you have the number on the tabulator that gets on that form. You have subtracting out the number of spoiled ballots, the number of provisional ballots, and then you have the number of unused ballots. And on that reconciliation form, it better balance out. And I know Wake County will follow up, and you'll be getting a call as a chief judge the next morning if your form hasn't balanced up. So they really take that seriously. Now, we did hear from another member on our committee that the sheriff brings the ballots. So, here's one of the problems we have in North Carolina. Every county in the state may have different procedures. And we did get permission from the Wake County Board of Elections to share our materials, specifically training materials to others. And I believe Wake County is known for a best practice county in terms of the way they run their elections.
That's great. That would be a great assistance to share something like that. Kitty, you have a question.
I have one comment. It hadn't been mentioned about accuracy of the tabulators. North Carolina does require a hand-to-eye recount after every election. And what that is the state board tells the counties which precincts they have to hand-to-eye recount. They have an exact number of Democrats and Republicans counting to make sure that your tabulators are equaling exactly how the voters have voted. And I think that's another thing that gives people a lot of security about the accuracy of the elections in North Carolina.
That's a good point. The tabulators, it's very specific as to how we have to open those tabulators and close those tabulators. When we open a tabulator, we have to open the tabulator before 6:30, and there has to be a zero tape. And there's certain information that myself as a chief judge and a Republican judge and a Democrat judge who were standing there with me overseeing these procedures and the opening of boxes, they all have to view this zero tape and see that the day of the election is correct, the time, and that there's no votes in any of the elections. Then they sign that, gets folded up, put in under a tab, and it stays that way until the end of the day. And then we start running off the results of the election, and we run off 5 of these. And the main one with the zero tape goes into the Board of Elections that night. Then, you know, we get a USB drive too. We've got a seal that we deal with.
Yeah. And some of this is an overlap with the cyber and ballot security.
Exactly.
Yep. So you all can figure out who's going to emphasize which part of that.
Yeah, I think as I've heard the comments, I realize that we are getting some overlap.
Yep. And that's okay. That's okay. To have, you know, 2 committees look at the same issue is perfectly fine. You know, more minds. But just to recognize that there are maybe areas that are more specific to one committee you could spend more time on. And then just recognize that it's part of something else. We've got 3 more to go. We've got 15 minutes. So counting votes.
All right, on behalf of on behalf of Judge Anna Mills Wagner, she could not be here, so I'm presenting on behalf of the committee. Wanted to, it's been mentioned here a couple times, but I was able to pull together a lot of data. Shawnee indicated, I just want to share very briefly one of the spreadsheets that I've got for this committee, for the absentee by mail, election day. I can share this information with the full commission if they're interested, but we thought it would be helpful to visualize the number of ballots that have come in to North Carolina through various elections. And with the data from the North Carolina State Board of Elections, I was able to go back 20 years now to 2004 to basically show the level of growth that we have seen over the past 2 decades. And in particularly, if you look at 2004, we exceeded that presidential year's number of ballots cast in 2018 and 2022, which were midterm years. So I have this information. It also breaks down by vote methods for absentee by mail, early in-person voting, election day, provisional transfer. We also broke it down by party registration as well as race and ethnicity. So we have this information that we can provide for all of these elections, and we'll certainly do that for any committee that wants that kind of information. The major points coming out of the counting votes committee, and we do have some overlap as well with some other committees, most recently just the last one, we did have a very healthy discussion about ranked choice voting. In fact, we received a presentation from Fair Vote organization that is advocating for ranked choice voting. I will be candid, I will not speak for the full committee. We're still working on our report, but I think that there are still some significant differences among the committee members as to what to do with this particular topic. We may just mention it, we may put out the pros and the cons from both sides, but I'm not sure that we will have necessarily a recommendation to advance. One of the key areas that we did think about in terms of potential recommendations is the opportunity for the public to observe a counting process, either in person or via Zoom, some kind of technology. We thought that transparency, sunshine in government operations might be something worthwhile, particularly as we have seen over time real questions about integrity, the security of the counting process, and those kinds of things. I think one of the things that we will stress in our report is the fact that North Carolina is so well regarded in terms of data transparency that if there were hundreds of thousands of mysterious ballots that came about, you can actually connect ballot information, not how they voted, not how the voter cast their ballots, but did a voter cast a ballot with voter registration? And merging those two files, as I've worked with them, it really does provide a peace of mind in terms of the dynamics that we have through the State Board of Elections and through our county boards. The other major area was to perhaps explore more ways to include unaffiliated voters. As we're all probably well aware, unaffiliated voters are now the biggest block of registered voters, and to bring them into the electoral process, particularly along with the registered partisan voters, perhaps a way that they could serve on a county board of elections, that might be something that the committee might be recommending as well. I think a lot of our report is just going to be basic information, again, kind of tying into a very strong theme that we've heard from in others, public education. And I think the counting ballots process is really one that lends itself easily to demystifying, to informing, to enlightening voters about the process of counting the ballots. With that, I'll end and be open to any questions.
Great. Michael, I think I have a new nickname for you, just like on Star Trek. You're now Data.
Jennifer,
I will happily take that title.
Jennifer,
Yep,
can
go ahead,
I ask
Bobby.
a real quick question? And you don't need to give me an answer, but is ranked choice voting an option for just primaries with the respective parties deciding that they want to use ranked choice or not using it? Seems to me one of the problems is the general election ramifications, but if it was just limited to primaries, anyway, so I would like y'all to think about that.
I think that was, if there was a trend towards the usage of ranked choice voting, I think it would be in the guise of primary votes to avoid a less than 3% statewide turnout rate that we saw in May. I think somebody else had a question. Sherry.
Somebody had one.
Yes, I did. I found out in our last primary in Wake County, we're divided into zones, and we have a coordinator that is assigned to these zones. And the coordinator that came to our precinct said that Wake County Board of Elections keeps 10 years worth of ballots where they can physically go back and get a lot of this data. I did not know that. So that's another part of the election day process that's kind of missing, is what happens, you know, physically down there at the Board of Elections. What happens from the day of the election to canvass day?
Great.
Well, not only that, may I add that they're in Orange County, I mean, they even control the temperature. They hold those ballots for 10 years, but it's in an environment where they're keeping those ballots, those paper ballots, intact over many years. So that's impressive.
Like the rare book room.
Yes.
All right, we got two more. Election infrastructure and admin. Is that you, Leslie?
It is. I'll try to do this in 4 minutes so my colleague can have some time. So our committee brainstormed a long list of concerns related to election administration and infrastructure, but we narrowed our approach to 2 areas of concern. First is the turnover and shortages amongst both election directors and staff and poll workers and election officials. And our second concern was safety and security risks in terms of verbal threats, physical violence, and the potential for that. So of course, we did lots of research and comparisons nationally and beyond, but we essentially, our recommendations, one is we developed a framework or an approach to the whole poll worker and election official recruitment. We think of it as recruitment across the lifespan. And that starts with promoting and strengthening the student election assistance program that North Carolina is already a shining example for that. I, in fact, in my last election was only able to do it because I had those 2 additional student workers. We also thought about once they move into college, one model that we saw in Arizona is an election fellowship program. And so we thought that would be an interesting model. It's a feeder for poll workers and election staff. And then, of course, just like many of you, we want to leverage existing initiatives and organizations that mobilize college students to vote that offer service learning hours, community service hours, that would encourage and incentivize students to serve as poll workers. And then as we move towards adults and others, we have lots of ideas like adopt a polling place, targeting specific groups, partnering with corporations and businesses that give incentives for their staff and faculty. I mean, their staff, I'm talking from higher ed, their employees to volunteer. We even looked at very specific areas because Shira was on our team. So we looked at working with the Bar Association and having CLE credits for attorneys so that they could teach about the election day process and then recruit them to work at polls as well. We talked about the political parties, retirement communities, on. And of course, undergirding all of that is we've got to use better technology and social media to promote poll working, to promote working in elections. That's where the world is today. Beyond recruitment, of course, we want to think more about bigger incentives, better stipends, better salaries. One of our recommendations is to really conduct a comprehensive salary study to see where we rank in terms of other states and that sort of thing, and how they even work across the counties in terms of the difference. We're talking about maybe transportation incentives for folks to work at the polls, recognition and awards for different boards of education, more professional development and training. And then, of course, more career planning, sort of how we're onboarding folks. Do we go to recruitment fairs, career fairs? And then is there succession planning? So we know a lot of our folks are going to be moving away, aging out of being directors and things like that. And then we want to look at finally, in terms of this whole area of which folks have already talked about, but this idea of these disparities and differences across counties, right? We know that there are all these best practices. Shira just shared a few. We have some great ones in Guilford County. We recommend the creation of a library of best practices, more gatherings of election directors and staff. For example, Forsyth County has this amazing flow chart. We just think that we could do it better in terms of how we administer elections by talking more and sharing that. And then finally, with this question about violence and physical harm, to be fair, we didn't find a lot of evidence of that happening already in North Carolina. We do not know that to always be true, so we want to be prepared in advance. So we looked at things like de-escalation training, educating law enforcement about election security, maybe even advocating for legislation that would protect election workers more. There's lots of models out there. And then within that, there was also a great example in Guilford County where they've already organized a task force of police and others to be ready on election day in case there was a call or a conflict. So that's a quick summary of kind of where we landed.
Awesome.
I just want to add one thing real quick. There's not a level playing field across the state or across the counties in the state because of how elections are funded, and they're funded by county commissioners. So you get a big county, you get to give better salaries and you have better training materials. That's not the case in some of the rural places. So it'd be nice if we could brainstorm how to help some of these other counties that don't have the resources that some of us have in the larger counties.
Yeah, funding is an issue, I think, on every committee and every issue. All right, we got 2 minutes for lawsuits and challenges. Is that you, Bob Edmonds? We don't have any lawsuits. Okay, we're done.
I hope it's Bob Orr because he's done most of the work on this.
Oh, okay.
Well, all right. No, Bob's been great. We've 3 particular issues that we want to bring up. One is we heard from several attorneys that it's becoming more difficult to get lawyers to participate in the process, in part because of the partisan divide that we're seeing, and law firms are saying to their lawyers, hey, stay out of that, don't get involved. And so one of the recommendations is working with professional groups like the Bar Association to increase the number of lawyers who are educated on election laws, and not just from a partisan perspective, but from a neutral perspective to give advice to small boards. So that's one. The second are a couple of nuanced issues. There was a lot of controversy. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court case dealing with the question of disqualification of a presidential candidate based upon the 14th Amendment. So you got a U.S. Supreme Court case. What wasn't answered in that case is how do you deal with the other qualifications or disqualifications for presidential candidates like age and citizenship. In North Carolina, the state board folks are saying we really don't have a process in place. If the No Labels Party decided to run a 28-year-old Canadian for president, how do you challenge that? And, I mean, they're disqualified under the Constitution, but does it require federal legislation to resolve that? So we want to bring that void, that issue up. The third one, and I think this is maybe the hottest potato out there, is under Article 6 of the North Carolina Constitution, there's a provision that says in a contested election, with contested not defined, for any of the Article 3 Council of State offices, that's the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, down the list, that if it is contested, the General Assembly will decide who won that election. That's occurred once about 10 or 15 years ago in a superintendent of public instruction race. But the rules that were put in place, and I have to say put in place by a Democrat legislature at the time, is essentially that if a candidate thinks that they didn't get the right number of votes and that they would have won, they can claim to have a contested case. It stops all judicial proceedings on that question, and it goes to the General Assembly. And I don't think the public's aware of it. I think there are a lot of things that could be improved about that process. And so that's the third issue that we would present.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Right.
a hot potato.
Well,
Yeah.
wait a second. So anybody who may be lost by a landslide could contest it? And
Well,
then the
I think
legislature?
arguably under the rules you could. Now I think it's a practical matter, but in the superintendent of public instruction case between Bill Fletcher and June Atkinson back in early 2000s, there was like an 11,000 vote difference, and they were fighting over provisional ballots. And what June Atkinson did was say, well, all right, this decision should be made by the General Assembly pursuant to this constitutional provision. And there were no rules, so the General Assembly then, passed some rules on how the process works. But I think in an effort to stave off, sort of a public outcry, they need to be at least educated that there is that possibility. I mean, if you got a really close governor's race in 24 or, superintendent of public instruction, it is not inconceivable that the General Assembly will decide who got the most votes. So
But we couldn't stop that. There's nothing, we have no standing in
that's a
court?
it's a constitutional provision. And now the provision in the law that says it stops all judicial cases.
Thunder, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it really is sort of a staggering issue. I mean, those of us, I can remember back when this happened, it was like, what? This case is going to the General Assembly. The court's not going to decide this. So anyway, it's one of those unknown hot potatoes that in an election season that could see some really close council of state races.
And it's good that there has been an issue already with that superintendent of instruction race. I remember that. So that's the storytelling that needs to be part of these reports.
Yeah, and on a 30-second request for personal privilege, when we put together this election commission, we didn't know what we were going to get, but listening to the incredible work that all of you people have done up to this point, has really been extraordinary. And I'm sorry we don't have the hierarchy of the Carter Center listening to this and seeing just exactly what's been accomplished by an extraordinary group of people. And so I'm most appreciative and really excited about what we're doing.
I agree 100%. And Martha and Michael and Chris, thanks for all your help, and thanks for everybody's help. You guys have put a lot of time, effort, thought. This is just, we did not imagine it would be this involved and engaged, and we're very excited, looking forward to July 15th. Michael, what are you doing there? You doing doing a little cheering there?
I'm turning my lights back on, so
I would
people
like
can
to
see me in the dark.
I would like
Did your
to
lights
extend-
go out? The storm's just starting here, so I don't know what's gonna happen. I guess we're not gonna have this, yeah.
Bob, what were you gonna say?
Well, I've just got to say, I got to give a special shout out to Rachel Capon, who's
Yeah.
had to attend all of these meetings, and God bless her for her patience in putting up with Jennifer and me and the rest of the team.
I'm jealous of her ability to multitask.
Yeah, youth.
Very impressive. It is very impressive. We marvel at all the time. Anyway, thanks y'all for hanging in 6 extra minutes. Appreciate it. I think we have done our dry run for July 15th. We all feel great about it. It's going to be some great stories coming out of it. Patricia will get with us and we'll hone some of those and send some teasers to the media, and we'll just all get ready for July 15th and have your final meetings in this month and get those reports mostly finalized. Again, these are drafts, but this is just tremendous work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Any last comments, anybody? There you go. Thanks again. Great work.